Chapter 9. Coming Together. Jacob and Niccolo ran across the countryside at the horse's pace, and it took them about 2 hours to reach the abandoned city. They passed hundreds of the chests on their way, each headed in the fountain's direction. It was late in the afternoon when they reached the broken mortar that served as a gravestone for the civilization that had once called that place home. Randy left his horse unhitched but a fair distance away from the meadow so it could roam and graze. The group approached the fountain together, and even now there were already chests gathering around it. Mimic chests of various shapes, forms, and sizes were all gathered in a circle around the fountain for some unknown purpose. Dawn looked nervous but excited to see so many in one place, her eyes flitting from one to the next as she examined them. Jacob noticed from the moment they set foot in the sanctuary that the stench of death lingered in the air. There was less than an hour before the sun would set. Randy tried to approach the fountain with Dawn in his arms, but Lial got in his way. "What are you doing?" she demanded to know. I'm not sure. I feel like something's calling me," Randy said with uncertainty. Lial snatched little Dawn from his arms. "Then leave our daughter out of it," she insisted. "But it wants me to bring her too," he somberly protested. "You aren't bringing her anywhere near those monsters. You've already caused more than enough trauma for her. There's no way I'm letting you get her killed," she said with a mix of fright and fury. "They won't harm us," Randy argued. "How can you be so sure?" Niccolo said grimly. "I don't know. It's just a feeling I have," Randy explained. "Well, you'll forgive me for not trusting your feelings after all we've been through," Lial said. Randy sighed and nodded, seeming downtrodden at her comment. "I think we should trust him," Jacob said, surprising Niccolo and Lial. "Yeah, it'll be fine," Dawn agreed. "Why's that?" Niccolo asked. "Well, we can probably handle anything that happens, right?" Jacob asked. The slight bags under Niccolo's eyes seemed to deepen for a moment as he thought about what he was asked, but then he smirked to his friend. "You know, you're pretty cocky for someone who's had a speck of power for such a short amount of time," Niccolo teased. "Maybe, but I'm not wrong either, am I?" Jacob asked. "If this old wolf god becomes a problem, you might be," Niccolo replied. "Sure, but what else are we supposed to do at this point? Stand around and wait for whatever's going to happen?" Jacob asked. Niccolo sighed. "You shouldn't always be in such a rush to get things over with, Jacob. That's one of your biggest weaknesses. If I were you, I'd try hard to work on that," Niccolo lectured. "I just want the people of this area to be safe and free again," Jacob argued with conviction. It brought a smile to Niccolo's face. "Well, at least your heart is in the right place. Hopefully that'll serve us well. But still, this isn't our decision. It's between Randy, Lial, and Dawn," he replied. Jacob knew he was right and nodded before looking to Lial. She seemed deep in thought as all eyes rested on her. After a moment, she looked down to her little daughter in her arm. "Dawn, honey, are you okay with trying to help us? It might be dangerous, but I promise we'll all try our best to protect you, okay?" she asked. Dawn nodded, wide-eyed. "All right, we're right here with you," she assured, handing her daughter back to her ex-husband. Dawn looked up to her father, and he gave her a strong look before nodding down to her. She nodded to herself and stiffened up a bit. Without warning, Randy started walking toward the fountain. "Cardi, cover Dawn," Lial ordered. Cardi yipped it in affirmation before immediately moving to Randy's side, ready to protect the girl at any cost. As Randy stepped through the many sitting chests, none of them made even the slightest of motions, save of hair that arrived, set themselves in place, and didn't move from that spot. He brought her to the edge of the fountain and slowly started lifting the girl toward the star-shaped gem hovering above the highest basin. Just before she could reach out for it, a flock of birds came flying over once again, landing in front of them and starting to plead with them not to touch it. But before they could finish even one sentence, many of the chests leaped from the ground and snapped up as many of the birds as they could get their twisted maws on. Only 2 little birds escaped as Randy backed off with Dawn in his arms. Cardi was going crazy, barking, biting, chewing on the chests, and doing everything in her power to protect her young friend. She was so riled up she didn't even seem to notice that Randy and Dawn were never under any threat in the least. Still, Lial was nearly as shaken as her companion. She insisted that Randy give Dawn back and not allow her anywhere near that fountain again. Randy didn't argue. "I can't believe you've been so reckless with her lately. Are you not going to be satisfied until she's killed, Randolphus?" she shouted. His eyes went wide. "No, I would never wish that on anyone, especially not Dawn," he said sadly. "Then stop doing stupid things that'll put her in danger," Lial decried. Randy hung his head. Lial was about to berate him some more, but she paused when she heard a strange but familiar squelching, bubbling noise. She paused to listen to it a moment. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked. Everyone's ears perked up, but they were all surprised by Niccolo pointing toward Sophia. "Look!" he called out. Everyone was beyond shocked to hear a strange rumbling, quickly followed by scores of mimic chests running through the trees. They all came and gathered around the fountain as Jacob and the others looked on in shock and awe. All the chests around the fountain stood up at once, and the largest among the chests went and sat itself down beside the fountain, opening its hatch. Jacob, Niccolo, and the rest ran quickly around the fountain, giving a wide berth to the chests as they looked on. The strange red and black bubbling liquid from before surfaced from below the ground, but unlike last time, it didn't climb into the fountain. Instead, this time it climbed into the largest chest's open maw. The chest stood back up and faced the others, seemingly struggling to contain the strange glowing liquid, but it burst forth without warning, as if the chest itself was puking it out. The strangely glowing liquid had mixed with the blood inside the mimic, and oddly glowing blood sprayed over the other mimics, coating them and making them all look like they were going to be sick. Next, they all started puking at once, pouring their insides into the fountain and causing the entire thing to be coated with rot and taint, the disgusting fluid dripping and pooling on the ground around it. The light seemed to be growing stronger as the fluid started taking on a life of its own, rising and pulling itself up the fountain. It reached up to the crystal gem, but it was scorched by its touch again. The strange liquid didn't seem to care in the least, climbing up and coating over the crystal as the sun fell from the sky. The full moon was just starting to rise as the crystal burst with blinding light as it had before, making them shield their eyes. The light shifted from bright white to sinister red before the strange goo was fired up into the sky as it had been before. "Prepare yourselves! Something tells me this is going to be a lot worse than last time," Niccolo said. He had no idea just how right he was. You see, this time, instead of bursting and fizzling out like it had before, the bright glowing orb shot into the sky continued to climb. Don pointed up to it with awe as it reached out for the moon, and Jacob's jaw dropped open as it touched it. The moment it made contact, the full moon's light was slowly overtaken by a sinister bright red glow. It only took moments for the entire thing to be bathed in red. "Holy crap, a blood moon," he remarked. Randy's eyes were wide with terror. He said, "There's only one way to fix this," and without warning he snatched Dawn from Leal and ran for the fountain. Cardi tried to get in his way, but she was kicked aside by a large mimic. He immediately put her up to the crystal. "Dawn, take the crystal! It will return the moon to normal, I'm sure of it," he proclaimed. Jacob jumped as he heard the howl of several werewolves approaching from the trees. Niccolo looked around quickly as he drew his hammer. "We're surrounded," he remarked. Jacob nodded, but Leal broke away from them, running to stop Randy from using Dawn to remove the crystal. The werewolves started emerging from the trees and drawing closer as Leal called out to Randy. "No, wait! Get her away from there!" she called as she ran. Cardi was trying to intervene as well, but the mimics kept her at bay. Before Leal could argue any more, Dawn had looked up to the moon and back to the crystal, having made her decision. She reached out and grabbed it, surprised it didn't harm her. Then she yanked it from its place above the fountain. Everyone froze when they heard a sound like stone crumbling, but Dawn was the first to see it. "Look," she said as she pointed. Randy brought her around the fountain to see the stone path behind it had crumbled away, revealing a huge open chamber underneath. He started looking inside, but then immediately started backing away, his face as pale as a ghost. From the opening, Jacob could hear a low gurgle, but his whole body was shaken when he saw the massive 8-fingered claw rise from the opening and grab onto the ledge. It was a sickening pinkish-orange color and swirling with flowing malice, and it used its hand to push itself free of its resting place. From the grave-like opening rose a massive creature nearly 4 stories tall at the shoulder. It had 6 long legs, each bearing a claw dripping with blood and vile-smelling substance. It had a massive head that was somewhat like a mole, sporting a massive mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth the size of tree trunks, and a tail covered with spines that looked like they could impale a horse. Its body was bloated and bulbous, and worst of all, it sported several disgusting, snapping mouths, each moving and writhing, seemingly entirely on its own. "That doesn't look like any old wolf god I've ever seen," Jacob said with fright. "Still think we can handle it?" Niccolo asked, growing the crystal of his hammer into a massive buster sword. Jacob wasn't really sure anymore, but they had unleashed it, so it was their responsibility. "I don't know, but we can't let that thing run wild," Jacob replied, drawing his sword. "You've got that right. Come on, let's see if there's something we can," Niccolo started to say, but before he could finish his sentence, he was cut off by a massive roar from the beast. It was so loud everyone covered their ears. We all managed to pull Randy and Dawn over to Jacob and Niccolo's side, but all three of them collapsed and covered their ears at the creature's roar. The werewolves were closing in, unaffected by the creature's powerful roar. As Dawn let go of the crystal to cover her ears, it started to float and flashed brightly, frightening the werewolves. Jacob uncovered his ears as it finished roaring, but they perked up when they immediately heard a familiar howl and a rush of wind. Wind blasted through the area, but they were shocked when the werewolves won't return to their normal selves as they had been before. Only then did it all come together. The moon. That creature must have made a blood moon as a plan to make the werewolves resist Caprit's cleansing wind, Jacob said. Do you really think it's that smart? Niccolo asked in reply, shocked when the creature's main head seemed to focus on him. Never mind. I could see it happening. But what should we do about it? Well, if I'm right, there's only one thing we can do now, Jacob said, eyeing the werewolves as they continued their approach. They were starting to get boxed in by them. The creature returned its attention to the east, seeming uninterested in their group. And that would be? Niccolo asked. We've got to stall them, Jacob explained. Stall them? What are we buying time for? We all asked. For Caprit to come and put that creature back in its hole, Jacob replied. The creature looked to him before roaring with unyielding fury. Without warning, one of the maws on the creature's side opened and sprayed out a torrent of blood, soaking them all. Jacob was shocked and disgusted, not pleased to be drenched in the disgusting fluid. Niccolo and Dawn seemed fine as well, and Lial had been shoved out of the way by Cardosa, protecting her from the assault. Randy did not seem okay. He stood up, grasping at his throat and coughing as his muscles spasmed wildly. His coughs quickly turned into a low groan that then developed into a wicked roar, and in mere seconds Randy was transformed. He turned into a werewolf like all the others, but unlike them he turned gigantic, standing nearly 10 feet tall and sporting glowing red eyes. Niccolo leaped up and kicked him hard in the chest, sending Randy sprawling away from them. Jacob realized that this was his moment and waved a hand, causing a burning whirlwind to kick up around them and protect them from the werewolves on all sides. I don't know what happened, but he transformed. It isn't safe here. We need to get you two out of here, right now, Niccolo said, offering a hand to Lial. It was the blood. It transformed them, Lial explained as she stood up. It all makes sense now. Those coins were made of the creature's tainted blood, and when it touched their skin, it caused them to transform at the signal it created. The question is, why didn't you two? Lial started to say, looking to her ex-husband. But before she could finish her sentence, Randy lunged through the flames to attack them, but Niccolo got in his way. Randy plunged a claw into Niccolo's chest, causing blood to pour from his back as he struggled to hold the creature back while his strength was failing him. Jacob leaped in and kicked Randy so hard across the face that he went spinning through the dirt as he bounced to the monster's feet. Are you all right? Jacob asked, seeing the huge wound in Niccolo's chest. I will be. I just need some time to recover, he wheezed before clutching his wound. All right, I'll try and buy you the time you need, Jacob replied. Niccolo nodded and gasped as he dropped to his knees, but he remained upright. We all immediately jumped into action, reaching into a pouch and pulling out a rope before pulling off her backpack and pulling out her coat. We all set to wrapping him up tightly to prevent blood loss, and Niccolo thanked her kindly. When Randy got up, he gave a howling roar that took Jacob's attention, but his focus was interrupted by the roar of a massive beast, causing everyone to cover their ears again. Jacob looked up at the beast to be surprised that it wasn't looking at him, but from the direction the creature was looking came a response.